What's going on, everybody? Jeff Holiday here, and today, unfortunately, we're going to be traveling back in time. Back in time to August of 2021, in fact, because we have to talk about natural immunity versus the COVID vaccine, apparently, because it's August of 2021, and that's when everybody was talking about it. Oh, wait, it's February 2023, and it's reared its ugly head yet again? Wow! How interesting. Surely this can't be a problem with the media. Now, who could possibly be exacerbating this and kind of blowing it up into the public consciousness far more than it really needs to be?
Because I saw in the paper today, kind of a big story, I think. I wonder how much it's going to get covered in the liberal media, because it's about how natural immunity, they did a giant study, 65 countries, or maybe something like 65 countries, many, many different studies. They looked at them all. Natural immunity, as good or better than the vaccine.
Oh, how interesting. That's right. Apparently, there was a paper that was put out by The Lancet looking at a meta-analysis of whether or not the natural immunity from getting a natural COVID infection versus getting vaccinated, and where they really lined up as far as hospitalizations and which conferred the greatest protection. But there's a problem with this, because none of this is new. We've known this for over a year and a half at this point. We were talking about this back in the 26th of August, 2021, published in Science. There has been countless of these examples of them looking at it and saying, hey, actually, if you catch COVID and survive, you do get a certain degree of protection. It goes much deeper than that. And Bill Maher, and what we're going to look at a little bit later, don't really get into the details. But I really want to point this out. This is not new. This concept is not new. But media is going to run with it because it's trying to make sure that this stays very relevant in the hearts and minds of people, especially people who feel like they're still somewhat inconvenienced by having to endure the lockdowns, mask mandates, et cetera, during, a global health crisis, a pandemic, whatever.
Something I've been saying since the beginning, and I get called an anti-vaxxer. That's not an anti-vaxxer.
This is something that's said very often by anti-vaxxers. They say, well, I've never directly said you shouldn't get vaccinated, so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But regurgitating anti-vax talking points and I'm just asking questions is functionally the same. And trying to, split that hair is not a sign of intellectual validity. It's a sign of cowardice.
I remember reading that they did a study of Republicans versus Democrats. The question was, what percentage, this is like a year and a half ago, what percentage of people who get COVID require hospitalization? The answer is less than 1%.
This in and of itself is grotesquely misrepresentative, because the truth is a lot more nuanced, something that Bill Maher does not really want to do because he's an anti-vaxxer. Back in 2021, we had several different studies that were looking at this, and we understood that because, variants and the swinging arm of the pandemic, these numbers can end up going up and down. It was at the point where younger people were 0.4% likely to be hospitalized because of a COVID exposure, but people who were much older, it could get as high as 9%. And when we're talking just in the United States alone, hundreds of millions of people, that's a lot of people. That's still a lot of people. And do we have to point out how many people died from this thing, but okay, that's 2021, okay? That's 2021. Why don't we look at something more recent? How about from the direct government of Washington state? From January 5th to February 1st this year, unvaccinated individuals were between 2.6 and 5.5 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19 compared to those who received at least one booster dose. From December 14th to January 10th, 2023, this year, unvaccinated individuals were between 2.8 and 6 times more likely to die from COVID-19 compared to those who received at least one booster dose. Isn't that interesting? But that's not what Bill Maher wants to talk about. Bill Maher wants to whinge and complain because he feels like the media wasn't being fair enough in giving people an accurate risk assessment. What? But the problem isn't really Bill Maher. It's just that Bill Maher says a thing and everybody pays attention. It's the rhetoric around this. And we're going to get a clear example by this guy who I don't even know who he is. He just has a very large YouTube channel, and he seems like a natural health wellness grifter. I don't know. Maybe he's great. Maybe when he's not talking about this, he's a very normal, rational, great guy. I bet. Please, by all means, tell me your video, natural immunity, better than mRNA jabs, new study finds. Let's go.
Remember, when all the healthcare workers that worked on the front lines during the early part of the pandemic, many of which got COVID-19 and didn't die, didn't get hospitalized and so forth, and they were terminated from their jobs. Many of you who, like me, got COVID in 2020. We couldn't go to restaurants. We couldn't go to Canada. We couldn't travel because we didn't have enough protection, according to the policymakers and health experts. And
okay. Here's another thing, too. A health and wellness YouTuber who's trying to basically make this argument that once you have some degree of protection, that now you have a magic force field. You have a magic force field, and that just COVID can't even get close to you or even enter your body. That's not how vaccinations work. That's not how immunology works. That's not how any of this ever works. If you're fully vaccinated, quadruple boosted, you've had 4 natural COVID cases yourself, you still, even with all that protection, you can still have COVID in your body if you were exposed to somebody that has COVID. It's not going to survive because your body will fight it off. You can still get it. You can still spread it. It's not a force field. It's never worked this way. It's never worked that way. But that's not what they're trying to say. That's not what they're trying to do. They want to make it into this argument so that you will be fooled into thinking that if you just get it naturally or you get vaccinated, you don't have to worry about it ever again. That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
And essentially what this study is highlighting that we should have not done that. We should not have fired the healthcare workers because they only had natural immunity. Because
that is not what it's saying. What it's saying is that it should be something that is considered in the larger response. You trying to organize it into that type of rhetoric is very, very telling, very interesting, very grifty, very anti-vax. Okay.
Because it turns out that when you see the entire virus, you get immunity to the spike protein, to the nucleocapsid, to non-structural proteins. You get a more durable immunity.
It's the same immune response as if you got the vaccine. It's the exact same. That's how immunology works. It's not like if you get a natural COVID exposure, it's like Lego and the vaccine is like Duplo or Mega Bloks. That's not how it works. We're talking about things in the microscopic level that have very, very basic functions, and they all function the same. That's why mRNA like vaccines are so powerful and how amazing of a technology it is. This idea that like vaccines are like the wish.com of COVID exposure is insane to me. I do not understand. This is so weird.
As this analysis of 65 different studies found, and they go on to say, protection from past infection against reinfection from pre-Omicron variants was very high and remained high even after 40 weeks.
Pre-Omicron. That's a big part of it.
Now, I want to share with you some facts here.
Oh, you're not going to mention Omicron? You're not going to talk further about Omicron? Why not? Why aren't you talking about Omicron? Is it maybe because there aren't really a whole lot of rules, that viruses mutate, that things aren't necessarily always going to work the same way. You know, maybe it might cast doubt on the things that you're trying to say, this whole naturalistic attitude, and that's how things are supposed to work. Or you could just avoid it.
Again, because this is just, it's insane that a lot of people didn't believe that seeing the whole virus would protect you in the future from seeing the whole virus again. They say, although protection from reinfection from all variants wanes over time, our analysis of the available data suggests that the level of protection afforded by previous infection is at least as high, if not higher, than that provided by 2 doses of vaccination using high-quality mRNA vaccines.
Okay.
Now, let's share with you some graphs here from Figure 4, directly from the article. What you're seeing here, the green bar, that goes out and talks about the protective efficacy. It turns out that the efficacy of natural immunity is closer to 90%. And if you look at the efficacy from some of these other treatments, it actually declines quite rapidly. So again, all the
I have a question. What is the bottom line supposed to represent? What time frame are we looking at here? I'd be very curious. I'd be very, very curious. And also, why Pfizer plus Pfizer booster, why Moderna plus Moderna booster don't really seem to be like complete lines or anything like that. Look, we've understood for a long time, all the way back, again, in 2021, we knew that the absolute best protection is if you had a natural exposure and you had been fully vaccinated and boosted. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, because the vaccines are safe. The vaccines are so safe, in fact, that they are vastly safer than getting a natural exposure to COVID. Again, even this year, as I showed in this video, before we even tackled this guy, you are way more likely to be hospitalized from a natural exposure and way more likely to die from a natural exposure than safe, effective vaccines. The unfortunate part about this is that COVID is most likely endemic at this point, which means it's probably always going to be here. And it's going to wane and go up and down, and it's going to be like the flu. And people will die. And it sucks. It really sucks. There's a chance that maybe we could have stemmed it. Thanks, anti-vaxxers. Thanks, people like this guy, spouting a bunch of anti-science propagandist rhetoric, all based on health and wellness and blah, 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 blah.
All the media and the politicians that said, we don't know how durable natural immunity is, so therefore you need to do these things, and if you don't, then we're going to prevent you from participating in society. Well, it turns out that the folks like you and I who understood the concepts of adaptive immunity and T-cell mediated immunity, it turns out that there is, in fact, more durability from seeing the entire virus, the whole virus, as you can see here.
Nothing in that paper says anything like you just described. That it's not in there. You are misinterpreting it, or you're just adding in your own flair. Now, the thing that's really interesting about this is to really crack down, we have to look a little bit at the paper, and we also have to understand a little bit more about natural versus vaccination immunity, okay? You see, there's aspects of this paper that he's just not mentioning, and a lot of anti-vaxxers are not going to mention. First and foremost is that if we're talking about Omicron, all of the things that man just said fall apart. Simple as that. And it's because if you have to pick and choose how these things work to make your point, and you have to, delete the part that contradicts you, it means you're lying and you are grifting and you are really putting people's lives at risk. But the other thing that I think is really interesting, and before we get on to natural immunity versus vaccinations, I wanted to point this out because I bet there's going to be a lot of anti-vaxxers who are conspiracy theorists who are going to be throwing this Lancet paper up and using it as like a silver bullet right into the heart of those authoritarians who are trying to tell us to have a lockdown and pump us full of the jab and blah, 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 blah. This was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. But I have a feeling that most anti-vax conspiracy theorists really do. Just saying. What this kind of rhetoric really comes down to is not specific to COVID. It's also very much a tried and true anti-vax trope that's been going on for probably 20 years at this point. natural versus vaccination. And one of the reasons why this is so disastrous is, yeah, there is always a case to be made by the basic function of human biology, of how immunology itself even works, that you do get some degree of resistance versus a virus if you've been exposed to it. But that's not always the case. This naturalistic fallacy does not work for quite a few things. For a really good example, if you get chickenpox, they're like, well, then I can't get chickenpox. But you can get shingles. These are the cases where, this idea that natural is somehow better, it falls apart on just the briefest of analysis. Ebola is natural, okay? Do you want to get Ebola? Or would you rather avoid it? I'm just saying. And when it comes to COVID, we do understand that, yes, you get some degree of protection from a natural exposure, but we also know that it's not a perfect protection either. Neither are the vaccines. The vaccines are a way to hopefully give some people protection without them at the risk of dying. But also, and this is the most important part out of this whole situation, why we wanted so badly to have a progressive and aggressive vaccination problem, is that when we really get down to it, this is all about trying to stem something that we can stem, that we can put a buffer on to protect people that are vulnerable. Babies still get COVID. If you have COVID and you get over it and you have a baby, that baby can still get COVID. Now, sure, babies have pretty decent immune systems. Sure. Not as likely to die as, say, like an old person. But those babies that are born with, say, autoimmune deficiency or disorders and weakened immune systems are still at risk, and they can't be vaccinated for a while. This is a way of making a protective shield where COVID cannot survive in host bodies long enough to reinfect others as rapidly as if it moves through like a brush fire through society. That's what it is. That's herd immunity. I know it evokes some things for people like herd, like the sheep, like the sheeple, but herd immunity. It's all of us doing our part to keep everybody else who can't be protected safe. And that's what I'm getting to with the end of this video. This type of rhetoric, this type of re-engaging in something that we've already understood since August of 2021, all of this comes down to either evil propaganda, opportunistic propaganda in the case of health and wellness grifters, an anti-vax mentality that's based either on being cruel or being selfish. And that's really where it's at. That's really where this whole thing is at. There's also the conspiratorial and paranoia that the vaccines are somehow going to inject us with like nanobots and 5G and blah, 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 blah. But whatever. It all comes down to people following a rhetoric because they don't want to look at objective reality, the truth. And the truth is, we survived a global pandemic. It took a chunk out of us. And now that we're still in it, and probably is never going to go away, people want to rewrite history to de-vilify people who objectively were wrong. They want to rewrite the narrative into this so that the anti-vax movement can have an even firmer stronghold and or even firmer foothold and stranglehold on the consciousness of society and beat their very incorrect, scientifically illiterate opinions into all of our heads. This is an old story. We've known all of this already, and they're still wrong. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Sorry we have to talk about COVID again. Not that fun. From my family to yours, take care of yourselves and each other. See you in the next one. Bye, everybody.